What to expect on the October points update. Now, I was really excited this morning when I saw that people on Twitter were talking about a Genesis blog post, and I thought they updated the list already. Unfortunately, that is not the case, but fortunately, we've got a little bit of a blog post and some communication regarding the upcoming points update, because it seems like, I'm just now glancing over the first sentence here, it seems like the point update isn't quite done yet, but they are announcing it and talking about it a little bit here. So we're gearing up for the next update to the Genesis point list, which will occur next Monday, the 27th. Okay, so from today where I'm reading this is going to be in 4 days. So we have an announcement for the announcement. POG champion, good communication, W. Okay, after pouring through all the results from Anaheim and Sao Paulo, here are the categories of cards we're planning to adjust. We are still reviewing and fine-tuning for now. Okay, so we get a first look as to what is to be expected. Nice. This will be the first round of changes where we have actual data, so we're excited. Everything up to now has been through playtesting and theory crafting. But now that we've got actual deck lists, we can put the plan in motion. Remember the basic ideas. Cards that get played by a lot of people will go up. Cards that aren't getting played as much will go down. But point decay is not automatic, and we will always keep a hand on the wheel to make sure nothing unfun creeps in. Okay, so this just means that just because no one played 100-point Royal Oppression does not necessarily mean Royal Oppression is going to get cheaper now, because not every single card needs to see play, right? Eventually. All right. Severe performance outliers. Certain cards and strategies saw distinctly outsized play rates and success rates. We mentioned Pot of Extravagance being everywhere in an earlier article, but it's not the only generic draw card that's gone overboard. For deck themes, there's a nice cluster of reasonably popular and successful deck types, another smaller cluster that are slightly more represented and successful than that, and then there's Vanquish Soul. We're glad that many players were able to quickly adapt their advanced format Vanquish Soul decks and try out the new format in the first few weekends of events, but Vanquish Soul players should expect to make sacrifices in both engine and non-engine on Monday. I mean, yeah, this is... It's nice to see this being announced beforehand, but at the same time, this was pretty obviously going to happen. Once again, they're making an interesting point here where at least Genesis format is a place where fans of Vanquish Soul are still able to play the deck somewhat, because it's been pretty rough in Advanced Constructed for Vanquish Soul players. You know, they may have picked up like a full Vanquish Soul core expecting to be playing it for a long time, and then they hit it super hard in Advanced Constructed, whereas in Genesis it's still a really good deck. I think the optimal solution here somehow, and I guess we'll see if they manage to nail it on Monday, is they should hit Vanquish Soul fairly hard, because Vanquish Soul is probably the best deck in Genesis format by a decent margin. So they need to make it weaker by a decent amount, but ideally they don't kill it. I believe, at least the way I'm interpreting Genesis format, I don't think it's the place where they just want to murder decks. I don't see Genesis as a place where cards or archetypes become completely unplayable. Ideally, after Monday, you can still play Vanquish Soul, but it's more reasonable in terms of power level, like way more reasonable. So I'm thinking like you should probably, if you want to play Vanquish Soul, have to spend almost all 100 of your points for your Vanquish Soul engine. Like, especially Holy Sue needs to be expensive to the point where you don't open Holy Sue going second all the time, because you actually have to consider playing only one or two. Because that is the I think that's the most powerful play in Genesis format, is when you draw Holy Sue going second. That felt like a lot of people that I've talked to, for example, Steven Santoli, said, if you draw Holy Sue going second and you can resolve it, you win the game, right? And so, like, that's something that they should work on. So I'm honestly, I'm even considering if it's worth giving Holy Sue like 40 points so you cannot play 3 copies anymore. But I guess we'll see what exactly happens on Monday. I expect decent amount of points for Vanquish Soul. Hopefully not unplayable, but hopefully they also don't go too light on it, because I think I think that's one of the main things that people don't want from Genesis format, is like for a certain deck to just dominate the format for multiple updates. So we'll see. Excessive use generics. There are a few of these, and several just need to be brought in line with similar cards that are already costed appropriately. These are mostly, but not entirely, draw effects, special summon and get a card monsters, and solemn judgment variants. Excessive use generics. Okay, what are we talking about here? Which these are mostly but not entirely draw effects, special summon, get a card monsters, and solemn judgment variants. Okay, draw effects. I can think of a couple of cards. I can think of Radiant Typhoon Vision. I mean, they've already mentioned Pot of Extravagance. Upstart Goblin, I think, is 0 points. But what is special summon and get a card monsters? Art mages? But those are not generics. Rescue Ace Impulse? Right, okay. Maybe they think Rescue Ace Impulse deserves some points because it's been very popular and it technically does go plus. But I feel like Rescue Ace Impulse. I mean, okay, fair enough. It's been pretty popular. I don't, you know. But don't all the Solemn Judgment variants have points already? Solemn Strike has points. I'm pretty sure Solemn Warning has points. I guess what doesn't have points is like Iron Thunder, as well as there's a couple of in-archetype counter traps that you can search, right? Onomat, I think, plays one. I've seen that. New cards for themes with points already. You will get 1 weekend to play it for 0, but the Fallen and the Virtuous will be getting some points come Monday. Ooh, okay. This is a very interesting one, because it further solidifies the idea of how they are dealing with new products. You know, this was something that people were worried about in the beginning, is like, oh well, doesn't that just mean that if new decks come out and they're all 0 points, that now everyone is forced to just play the new stuff? So it is fair, you know, if a really good card releases, why not give it points immediately? You know, like, I guess maybe it starts off rather low and then it'll increase over time, but like new and powerful cards and archetypes should not be free in Genesis format, because then it's going to be very obvious what you are going to play, right? And so this is a good thing, that even though I'm a big fan of this card, I like this card. I've talked about it on stream a bunch. I've talked about the Fallen and the Virtuous for like Radiant Typhoon as a generic card, because it like gets you card advantage over time. Really good grindy card in Genesis format. So I'm excited for this card. But the fact is, even if this card gets 5 points, 10 points, or maybe even 15 points, I'm still gonna try it. I'm still excited to play it. I think 10 points is probably a fair deal for this card, at least. Like, if this card is 10 points, I'm still willing to make room in my Radiant Typhoon deck for it. Yes, Josh, but Branded is already heavy hit in Genesis. Good. Branded is very powerful. It's fine that it's hit already. Like, Branded is already doing well. Even though it has points, it's doing well. Branded should not get a free 0 point really good tool in Genesis format. That shouldn't be happening. Okay. Spells that weren't tempting. There are a good number of powerful spells on the list that seem a little too costly to tempt duelists into playing them. Mirage of Nightmare is a good example of this type. Ooh, I'm excited for Mirage of Nightmare. Ooh, I'm excited. I mean, the thing is, like, it's funny because for me, Mirage of Nightmare was already tempting. Mirage of Nightmare was already a tempting card because I was playing it in Radiant Typhoon a little bit and I was playing it in Paleo. But it is true, in the grand scheme of things, this card has really underperformed, even for the low cost, quote unquote, of 10 points. Josh, when spell draws cards. Exactly, I love that. No, Mirage of Nightmare, I've said this before, I don't think Mirage of Nightmare should be 0, but 10 points is too much right now. You know, you don't really see many decks play Mirage of Nightmare. I wonder what other cards they mean by this. I honestly, the way this sounds, it feels like it could be a relatively large update once again, which does make sense because, of course, we are starting with a super big list here. You know, like they've come out with this initial idea of what the format could look like. They've basically tried to make this list as accurate as possible, I guess, to where cards are costed appropriately. But of course, in a list of 500 cards initially, and in a game with a card pool as big as Yu-Gi-Oh, they are gonna miss a lot of cards where either some cards are slightly undercosted and some cards are overcosted, so no one played them. Another example, yes, Monster Reborn. What is it, 10 points or whatever? No one is gonna play Monster Reborn for 10 points. Is it even 10? It might be 15. I have no idea. But the point where people start playing Monster Reborn is maybe like 5. Even at 5, I'm not sure if people will. So realistically, there's a bunch of cards on the list that are slightly too expensive for people to play them, and it's good to see that they are planning to make these cards cheaper. At 3 points, I would consider it. Yeah, I think 3 to 5 points for Monster Reborn is where you could consider playing it, because it is a good Yu-Gi-Oh card, you know. But like, I mean, it's legal. Monster Reborn is legal in advanced format, right? It is legal, right? 1? Is it at 1 or is it at 3? At 1. Why is it still at 1? Anyways, I digress. Themes that weren't tempting. There are several themes that were very popular internally and still used despite their current point costs that the world at large wasn't interested in playing. We will adjust it a bit. Caesar changes his thumb to point up. This is an interesting answer to the question of that a lot of people had. Why do these cards have points? And some of the archetypes that people really pointed at with that question was ninjas, gladiator beasts in some ways, and sword soul. Those 3, and centurion. Those 4 decks mainly. You can probably come up with more examples, but they've made it pretty clear that they've been testing this format for a while internally within Konami. So they've had people build decks and try to come up with stuff, and just to try to figure out where certain cards need to be costed. And apparently someone within Konami built a pretty good ninja deck. Someone within Konami built a pretty good gladiator beast deck, and someone built a good sword soul and a good centurion, and so on and so forth. And so that's why those archetypes had pretty steep costs in the beginning, which as a result has led to those archetypes. They are not in a balanced spot right now, because they are basically completely not played in Genesis format. No one, I haven't seen anyone bring Sword Soul to a tournament or do well with it. I haven't anyone mess around with ninjas. I haven't seen anyone mess around with glad beasts. I haven't seen anyone mess around with Centurion, simply because those point costs to the archetypes seem to be too harsh. And you can't really argue with that logic, you know, like they thought the decks were going to be good, so they put points on them. Fair enough. But now in reality, no one wants to play them anymore, so you should reduce the points. That's how this format should work. And that's good. So I guess the question is, how far down are we talking? You know, like how far down are we going to go with the Sword Soul cards, for example, you know? Okay. Extra deck cheat cards. When you have extra deck monsters summoning other monsters from the extra deck, like Bahamut Shark did, it's going to draw some attention. Okay, what are we referring to here? Utopia Dragonair? Ah, the one they make in Onomat, right? Because, I mean, they are certainly not pointing at Bahamut Shark, because I don't think they're going to reduce Bahamut Shark. The Generator Xyz, right? Levitin summoning out Jormungandr is also cheating a card out, I guess, in some ways. It must be some of the utopic stuff, though. FTK combo pieces. Okay, what do we have here? Some players decided to just run various FTKs over and over again in the hopes of breaking through to the Invitational. None of them succeeded, and now we will force such players further into the unrealistic clickbait combo dimension if they want to try again. Based. Oh man, it's funny how they're roasting them too. They're like, none of you guys succeeded, but we're gonna hit your cards anyways. Dude, Genesis format feels so much closer to the community than advanced format. It feels like for years, or for 20 years at this point, the player base and Konami always felt so far apart. It always felt like there was it was like this almost this entity that you can't interact with, you know. You don't get anything out of it, you can't tell them anything. And here it feels so much closer. It's like you go to these tournaments, they see what you're doing, they see what you're playing, and you can quite literally have an influence on this format just by taking part in it. Because if you find something cool, or if you build something crazy, or if you come up with some crazy ideas, you know, it is literally, you know, yeah, it just gets mentioned here, you know, like you come up with a crazy idea, the next Genesis point update might have your deck in it with points on it. I think it's awesome. I think it's wholesome. It's funny too. And it's the right thing to do, you know. Just because none of them won with the FTKs doesn't mean that they shouldn't like keep an eye out for decks that actually see play in terms of like FTKs and stuff like that. Like an FTK can be a problem for the game even if it doesn't like win a tournament. It still impacts some people that play against it, and they might not enjoy their experience. So it's good that they have an eye out even for some strategies that aren't necessarily winning everything. Cards likely to become an issue, but we just can't prove it yet. We're still building and testing decks internally, and there are some cards we anticipate to get unfun and out of hand at some point in the next month if we don't adjust them now. Okay, so this is an interesting one, and I think this is where this is something that people might disagree on this philosophy, right? And we've talked about this a couple times, where the question is, do you hit cards before they become an issue if you are sure that they will become an issue, right? Some people say no. Some people say like, no, a deck needs to perform before you hit it. I personally think if you do this properly, this can be very good. I think preemptively hitting something that will become a problem in the future is a good thing if someone with good understanding does it. A great example here, not from Genesis format, but from Advanced Constructed format, is Artifact Mjolnir. Was Artifact Mjolnir a problem before the last ban list? No, because everyone played Paradise Smasher in rank 5 K9 decks. However, should they have preemptively hit Mjolnir, because it was in hindsight pretty obvious that Mjolnir locks were going to replace Paradise Smasher locks? Yeah, they should have. Everyone would have liked that. So in a lot of cases, preemptive hits I think are a very good thing to do if someone with a solid idea of what's going on makes them. So it's impossible to say here what they are referring to, but if there are a couple of decks out there that maybe they found internally and they are incredibly unfun or incredibly broken, then I don't mind them getting some points beforehand. I mean, I guess the nice thing here is that if they aren't really being played yet, then no one is really being punished here. You know, it's not like a deck that people already play gets some points, but instead, you know, it's just a preemptive measure. Game administration troublemakers. A few cards cause issues with the progression of the game or create conflict external to the game between the players that must then be resolved by the judges. So, last turn. Shoutouts to Stevie. An example of this kind of card is Question, which suspends a critical part of the official tournament policy for the duration of its activation and resolution. Wait, what does Question do again? Isn't Question the one where you have to say like the bottom card of the graveyard or something like that? Which technically is weird. When activating this card, your opponent cannot check cards in the graveyard. Your opponent calls the name of the first monster found at the bottom of your graveyard. If he or she calls it right, the monster is removed from play. If they call it wrong, the monster is special summoned to your side of field. Okay. I mean, it is true. This kind of card is unfortunately, or fortunately, it's terrible, so no one has played it. But it does create some weird instances where, you know, what if someone plays this card in an actual game in 2025? because technically, first of all, you were technically supposed to be able to check the graveyard at any time, but also second of all, people, and this is just something that happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is something that is impossible to enforce. People rearrange their graveyard a bunch of times. People take their grave, people move cards around, people shuffle their grave, like that just happens. You cannot possibly go around and force everyone to keep their graveyard in the same order. And even if you wanted to enforce it, like, you would be handing out so many penalties, people would be getting so many, it'd be such a miserable experience for everyone involved, right? So like, this card thankfully is not seeing any play. To be honest with you, I feel like even in Genesis format, this card in particular probably will never see play. Realistically, I thought they were just gonna mention last turn, because that's obviously, I feel like this is what we're referencing here. In case you didn't, in case you missed all of it, Stevie, a fellow Yu-Gi-Oh content creator, brought a last turn Dinomorphia deck to YCS Anaheim Genesis tournaments, and caused some trouble there, because last turn is a card that's last been printed in like 2003 or whatever, and the wording on the card is super weird, and it works in a super weird way, and there's no official rulings. It doesn't have problem-solving card text. There's a whole, Stevie made like 5 videos about it. You can go check it out on Stevie's channel if you want to get deeper into it. But it's pretty weird. There was like a video going around of like 7 judges around the table trying to figure out how this card interacted at this point. So yeah, I feel like this is aimed mainly at last turn, because the funny thing is, as opposed to question, last turn actually is a freaking good Yu-Gi-Oh card in terms of what it offers, whereas question is just a worse version of Monster Reborn. Essentially, last turn actually wins you the duel. So last turn is an actual, there's reason to play this card. If this card was legal in advanced format, people would maybe try to make it work somehow. I don't know how you would, but somehow you probably could. But the way this card reads, this card can only be activated during your opponent's turn when your life points are 1,000 or less. Select a monster on your side of the field and send all other cards on the field and in their respective owners' hands to their respective graveyards. After that, your opponent selects and special summons one monster from their deck in face-up attack position and attacks your selected monster. Any battle damage from this battle is treated as 0. The player whose monster remains alone on the field at the end phase of this turn wins the duel. Any other result is a draw. The wording on this card is a nightmare, and some rulings from back in the day make it even worse, because apparently the way this has been ruled in the past is that the only way for 2 monsters to battle is in the battle phase. So instead of just saying like, yeah, okay, these 2 monsters battle during main phase 1 or something, it opens up like a mini pocket dimension battle phase that you go into to then attack, and then it's completely, it's stupid. The videos about it were very funny. But look, the premise of Genesis format is that technically every card is legal. But I do think they want to further disincentivize people from actually playing last turn. So I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if last turn goes to 100 points. The thing is, even at 100 points, I feel like you will not get around to eventually, you will eventually have to make a PSCT version of last turn and release rulings for it. I don't think there's a way around it. Even for 100-point last turn, you can theoretically play the card. And I personally don't believe they want to make it 101 points. Because the thing is, 101 points, even that doesn't solve it, because in theory, Genesis format is supposed to be playable at different point caps as well. Like, of course, Genesis format 200 points is going to be a Wild Wild West format all over the place in power level. But you could still play last turn then, and people need to know how it works. Like, last turn is a legal Yu-Gi-Oh card now. So this issue that we have basically ignored for 20 years, with last turn because it was just like, okay, we'll ban it and we will never look at it again. Now it's legal, and they need to tell us how it works, I suppose. They wanted people to play it too, since it was set to 75 and not 100. That's the thing with last turn. It is genuinely a somewhat interesting card if you just knew how it worked. If we knew exactly how it worked, maybe you could find a deck that's more like a control deck, like Dynamorphia, where it tries to eventually win the game on last turn. Could be a thing, right? Like I think the solution to this problem is not to put last turn at 100 points. I think the solution to this problem is just clarify how this card works. That's the solution. This will be the first adjustment based on primarily real-world Genesis play. We are always looking for more data, and you can help by sending in deck lists from your tournaments or posting them online on written or video form. If you can add hashtag Yugioh Genesis, even better. P.S. Remember, whenever we update points, the deck builder website will always have them first, and we will post an article here right away. The point list at the main Genesis page will probably lag behind a little bit, don't panic. And keep in mind, we are still in early access and are hoping to revamp this in the near future. Okay. I mean, yeah, once again, I would just be repeating myself, but awesome communication. I love getting the announcement for the update on Monday. I love knowing what's going on inside their heads when they're approaching this format. A lot of the things here I agree with. You know, I agree with, of course, hitting cards like Pot of Extravagance and hitting Vanquish Soul. Very popular generic staples. I agree with putting some points on powerful new cards. I agree with reducing the points on some stuff that wasn't really tempting, like archetypes or individual cards. All this kind of stuff. I also agree with hitting FTKs that are running around. I agree with, you know, preemptively hitting some problematic stuff. It's all good news, as per usual with Genesis format. It's good news, I think. And it addresses a lot of the things that people were concerned about with the first couple of weeks in Genesis gameplay. You know, every single discussion on Genesis format that I've seen had a lot of these things in there. You know, it said like Vanquish Soul too powerful and so on and so forth. I guess one thing that is not mentioned in here that I'm going to be very interested to see on Monday is how are they going to deal with some individual cards that people have been having concerns about. You know, like I'm talking Dimension Shifter for 10 points, for example, is not something that they mentioned here. Because realistically speaking, Dimension Shifter has not seen that much play in Genesis format. It saw play, but not a crazy amount of play. But the problem with that is I don't think the reason why Dimension Shifter didn't see as much play is not because the points are appropriate, but it's because not every deck can play it. So naturally, Shifter is not going to appear in every deck. Shifter is not as generic as a card, even though theoretically every deck can play it, practically not every deck can play it. So if for 10 points, it still is an auto-include in every single deck that can play Shifter, like Exosister, is it maybe still too cheap? That's something they didn't really touch upon here. I'm sure Dimension Shifter is going to be a topic in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, also in Genesis format, so I'm hoping eventually they will address it. Even if it's just giving some reasoning as to like what they think about the card, you know, like whether like even Droll and Lockbird, you know, if they released an article saying like, okay, we hear your concerns about Droll and Lockbird. However, at the moment, we deem it necessary to keep some FTKs in check or whatever. Sure, you know, at least we know where it's at if that's the case, right? And so that is something I'm interested in. And another thing is what's gonna happen to the good decks that aren't Vanquish Soul, right? Like what's gonna happen to, how are they gonna approach decks that are currently more like the second or third best deck in the format, right? Like I'm thinking Generator, I'm thinking Archmage. Are we gonna hit those, or are we just gonna be like, okay, once Vanquish Soul is done, they get their time in the sun? Odeon, yes. Like, is it okay if those decks are unhit? Which I guess we'll find out on Monday. But overall, W communication and so on. Awesome. Love that. Love that.